I love this chair because I feel a little like Alistair Cook. If any of you watched Masterpiece Theater, I feel like I should pull a book off the shelf and sit and stare into the camera. But I'll try to talk to instead of roll of Masterpiece Theater. I was thrilled when Jill asked me to come and talk here, and then started to think I've given a similar talk to our retreat. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Intersections, which is an undergraduate retreat series, but we have started at the law school something called Sidebar, which is a retreat for law students to really sort of take stock of, are your expectations in law school being met? Where are you going in law school? And part of the format is to have a faculty panel. And one of the things faculty are supposed to do is really sort of talk about how do you get where you went. So I've done a similar talk about 3 or 4 times. And it's funny, I was thinking as I was preparing for this one that either I'm getting more reflective, it's possible, or I'm just getting to be a better storyteller, because I think I'm figuring out parts of the narrative in a different way. Now, I don't know whether that means I'm making things up, or whether I'm just reflecting differently on experiences I had. I'm not sure, but I noticed the story has morphed over the years that I've been doing this. So don't necessarily take this as truth. This is the version right now. But I actually think that's sort of not a bad way to look at different points in your life, because the version does keep changing. And you do, as you reflect on how you got to different places, sometimes a certain decision seems clearly why you got to a certain place, and then sometimes you realize it really was something else. There are a couple of things that, as I think about talking about how I got to BC, I'll talk first about how I got to BC, just physically BC, and then also how I got to be Dean for Students. But there are some themes, and as I say, this is from having done this before at some retreats. And I was thinking today that the themes are sort of the times in which you enter a particular profession or you start graduate school. Like it or not, the times really affect choices that you make. It doesn't mean that you don't have any choice in it because you enter a profession at a particular time, but it certainly does have an impact. And also the element of chance in how you get into different positions, which isn't a bad thing. I used to think of chances in career as sort of a personal failing, like I ended up places in sort of a serendipitous way, and to me, previously I'd think, well, that sort of shows a lack of focus and a lack of discipline. And I've actually come to think that, and from talking to a lot of colleagues and listening to people at different retreats, that chance just plays a significant role in a lot of people's careers. And it actually doesn't mean fecklessness. Chance doesn't mean you have no direction and you're just sort of being pushed along. Chance is, I think, something else, or luck, chance, sort of random occurrences. And I guess the other thing is that I think, and this is true for any professional, single, married, with children, without children, there's always the struggle between professional demands and who you are outside your profession and who you want to be outside your profession, and who you want to be to the various communities in which you live. So those are just some of the things that I think about whenever I do sort of a talk like this. To sort of start at where I am now and trace back, I've been at BC Law for 13 years as Dean for Students, or for almost 13 years as Dean for Students, for probably about 12 as Dean for Students. I've been there full-time for 13 years, and prior to that, I taught part-time at BC Law, running a clinical program, which I still run, an externship program. And I first came to BC in the early 70s, and I came here to go to graduate school in English, which, and then came back and went to law. But all told, I realized BC is the place that I've spent for my post-college career, BC is the almost the common theme. I mean, I have done other things, but more than half of my professional or post-college life has been associated with BC in one way or another, as a student, as a part-time faculty member, and as now as an administrator and a dean for students for a number of years. And I anticipate staying on at BC as long as the market will allow, for the rest of my professional career. I first came, the sort of, just to kind of give an illustration of the times and how the times can affect where you end up. I first came to BC, as I say, to go into a master's program in English. I mean, my first thought out of college of a career choice was to be a college professor in English, or maybe to teach at a private school but in English. And because I loved being an English major as an undergrad. And so when I got a chance to come to BC and I had a teaching fellowship, I did really love it. But I came here in the early 70s, and this was before most of you were born, but it was a fairly tumultuous time in terms of the Vietnam War, and in terms of a lot of social movements, and it was just very recently post-civil rights movements. It was really the beginning of, or just after the beginning of the women's movement, the feminist movement. And at that time, just being a graduate student in English seemed a little bit isolating and outside of some of the mainstream larger social issues that were going on. And so while I was in graduate school, I was also volunteering at a couple of drop-in centers for kids who had either run away from home, or kids who were in trouble with the courts, or kids who had been kicked out of their houses. And so after I finished my master's program, I didn't apply for a PhD program. I actually worked for the Department of Youth Services, it's kind of an odd jump from medieval literature to the Department of Youth Services, although maybe not as odd as one would think. And I did that for almost 4 years, and was really fascinated by government work and the government's capacity, hopefully, to improve people's lives. And particularly because when I started working at the Department of Youth Services, as I say, it was the mid-70s, a social reformer had come in and shut down all the institutions, the juvenile justice institutions in Massachusetts, practically overnight, really without much of a plan of what to do after, which probably wasn't the wisest public policy move, but it was very dramatic. So it was a really exciting time to be involved in juvenile justice, and that led me into law because so many of the changes were being pushed at that point by what's called impact litigation, large-scale lawsuits that would challenge how states and the federal government ran prisons, ran juvenile detention facilities, ran facilities for mentally retarded or disabled people. So I was sort of drawn to, and I know I was talking with one of you before, when I decided to go back to graduate school, I had a choice between a PhD in public policy or coming and getting a JD. And it was a fairly hard decision, but I decided to get the JD. And I think that was from having worked in the government and particularly because it was a juvenile justice program, seeing how lawyers impacted individuals' lives. So even though sometimes I think, I should have gotten the PhD in public policy, but that's past. So I became a lawyer and worked in legal services, which is free legal aid for indigent people, particularly with disabled children, and went into private practice for a while because I sort of wanted to prove to myself I could do private practice. And once I did, I decided that I really was a government lawyer at heart, or a public interest lawyer at heart. It was like important for me to say, I can do it. And then I said, but do I want to do it? And then worked at a district attorney's office and followed the district attorney when he was elected to be Attorney General of the Commonwealth. And so I got an opportunity to work with a couple of, the same incredibly talented public servant. I mean, Scott Harshbarger was district attorney of Middlesex County, then became the attorney general, and he was just really, it was like going to a master's in public policy program to work with him in terms of his vision and his scope and how he energized people to use the government and the power of the government to improve people's lives. I'll have to get a tape of this and send it to him because he loves to hear it. He loves to hear us alums praise him. And I will bring a tape to him and say, see, Scott, I do say that it was transformative to work for you. I say it in public. But it actually was. And it was just a wonderful experience. And how I got first to the district attorney's office, and then from the district attorney's office and the attorney general's office, that was following his progression. But then to BC is sort of one of the other themes I talked about. I moved partially from private practice to the district attorney's office. Part of it was, okay, I've done this, and at heart I prefer being a government lawyer. I like representing the public. And part of it was a work-family balance. I had, while I was working at the firm, I had my 3 children in fairly quick, my children are fairly close in age, and I just felt, and this is not in any way a suggestion that people can't work full-time in private practice and raise wonderful children, but to me, the strain of what I was doing, it was taking too big a toll. And the opportunity I had going to a district attorney's office was to run a project that was working with schools and law enforcement to try to work on school violence and drug prevention and alcohol abuse prevention. And it sort of worked around the school calendar. So it was terrific. I could be a lawyer, I could be in a district attorney's office, but I basically had summers off and I could work, and I could have school vacations off and work more on a school schedule. So, as I say, that's sort of another theme of, as I talked about, just that trying to not just be consumed by one aspect of your life or your profession. So worked at the district attorney's office for a while, went to the attorney general's office, and left the attorney general's office really with the idea of I was leaving for a year. I got an opportunity to teach in the writing program at BC Law, and I had gone to BC Law, and it's a terrific writing program, and of course this sort of married something from my more distant past, being a teaching fellow and being an English major, so it was sort of a great opportunity to put those two things together. And here's the chance or serendipity part. While I was at BC teaching full-time in the writing program, most unfortunately my predecessor, Dean for Students, had to have back surgery, needed to take a 6-month leave, and the dean asked me if I would fill in for 6 months. And so I said, sure. It was because it gave me another 6 months there. I had thought I'd go back to the Attorney General's office, but it gave me a little more time. And she ultimately decided that she couldn't come back full-time, and this is a full-time job. And so that's sort of the end of the story. I mean, I've been there ever since, and that was 12 years ago. And I really love what I do. Katie O'Dare's here in the audience. I love what I do. There are days when I don't love what I do, but that's true of any job. And what do I love most about it? As I said to a few of you before, I've never regretted going to law school. I loved the legal training. I'm very proud of being a lawyer, and I love the idea that I can work with trying to contribute to shape new lawyers and try to help young people find a place in a profession that I hold in very high regard. Most of the public does not, but I do. I think it's wonderful to be a lawyer, and it's really exciting to be able to help people on that process. I do teach a course each semester, which is also a great opportunity. I love interacting in the classroom, but I really love the informal teaching that goes on when somebody is trying to sort out sometimes, unfortunately, big issues of a terrible tragedy in a family, and what does that mean for continuing in law school, and how can I do this and be true to my family and pursue my goal. And also sometimes on a very, very mundane, I'm not sure what sort of lawyer I want to be, what sort of courses should I take. I love that sort of informal teaching, mentoring as well. So, that has been, this has been a wonderful job. I mean, really a very fulfilling job. And I said to a few of you before the talk as well, working in an institution of higher education is really just a gift in a lot of ways, because there are always some fascinating talk or some fascinating people to meet. As I say, you're surrounded by energetic, young, talented, smart people. It's a wonderful setting. I highly recommend it for anybody who's thinking of looking for an area in which to work. I've just enjoyed it thoroughly. There's sort of a natural cycle to the school. Even I work 12 months, but the ebb and flow, the start and stop of semesters is really very energizing. And that's something that when you move away from school, you suddenly realize that you miss, because it's, June is just the same as May, is just the same as September, is, and sometimes it's hard to kind of recharge. And that's one of the great things about school cycle and higher ed in particular. It really gives you that opportunity to start anew. As somebody said, no matter how much we mess up with one class, they're gone in 3 years, and we get to try to improve our mistake, on our mistakes. We can start over again and hope we do it better. I hope none of my first years are seeing this and thinking that we're not messing up with you if you are watching this. So I highly recommend higher ed as a good place to land in for all those reasons. One other thing that Joy did mention was talking about what it means to work at a Jesuit Catholic institution. And I have to say, and this is, I don't have a great basis of comparison, because really, other than 4 years as undergrad in a large state university in New York, this is the only institution of higher learning I've really been affiliated with. I think I taught at Brandeis for 6 months as a teaching fellow in a fellowship program, and co-taught another course at one other. I'm not even sure I can remember where I taught at a 2-year college years ago before I went to law school. But so I can't do it comparatively, but I can tell you from talking to my counterparts, other deans for students in law school, the thing that I prize and see so much about working in a Jesuit institution is the latitude, even in a highly structured, hierarchical, and competitive professional educational environment, law school, the ability to really to focus on people as individuals and try to meet them where they are as they go through their educational, make their educational progress, and really to try to shape the environment to assist and support them. And I know from talking to my counterparts that I have latitude to, on simple things, reset exams, extend papers, work with course loads, that it doesn't exist in other people's work environment, or it's much more bureaucratic. There is a committee that has to decide on that rather than just sort of a discussion with a faculty member. I unfailingly find faculty members willing to make adjustments, even adjustments that make their life harder, when a student is really in need. Lawyers will tell you, and there's some truth to it, that law school is sort of the boot camp of academia. It's the MBA programs I think are similar, but and certainly medical school, but it's a very, very intense, lockstep, rigorous program, particularly in the first year. And even in the first year, I don't think I've ever encountered a dean, an academic dean, or a faculty member who has been unwilling to make an accommodation when it's a student who's really been in need. And I really put a lot of that down to being able to draw on the Jesuit tradition and the fact that the cura personalis and the fact that we're not just training people to be good scholars and good lawyers, but we're training them to be good people. And that if they need assistance at a particular time, it is our obligation. It's not that, oh, okay, we'll do this. It is our obligation to provide that support. And it's, as you say, in my job, it goes well beyond what we are required to do. For example, the Americans with Disability Act tells us that we have to make certain accommodations for people with certain disabilities. I feel I have the latitude if somebody needs assistance because of death in the family, because of an illness that might not technically meet the ADA, to craft a solution for that person, which is just really a gift. I mean, it makes my life more enjoyable. It makes my life easier, but most important, I think it makes for a great community at the law school. And I do think, and as I say, BC Law is where I went to. It's where I got my law degree. It's where I've taught, where I've worked. So I can't compare, but frequently, I know from talking to friends of mine over the years, less so now because I've been out of law school for so many years, but when I was first out of law school, I talked to many people who got terrific legal educations, but really had no attachment or affinity to their law schools other than being thankful that they got very good legal educations. And BC Law, in spite of the hierarchy and the competitiveness of law school, really does manage to engender a sense of community and a sense of students helping each other. And as I was saying to a student yesterday, the administration and the faculty can support that, but we can't create that sort of community. It's the students who bring it in, but we do have the latitude to support that. And I really trace that back to the fact that there's a religious tradition underlying the system of legal education that we're providing, or the legal training that we're providing, which has really just made it a terrific experience.